Namaskar and thank you for joining us on our weekly program on geoeconomics. Today we'll put into perspective how and why India has managed to moderate inflation to 4.87%. Retail inflation declined to 4.87% in October. This is from 5.02% in September. Fuel, power, manufactured goods have all come down. And the RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das said recently at an event in Tokyo that India's economic performance owes a lot to the very calibrated, focused and targeted monetary and fiscal responses since the pandemic. And he also said that economic growth in India is getting stronger while inflation is also coming under control, driven by the inherent dynamism and prudent policy mix. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his Independence Day address this year, had promised to take more measures to ease the burden of price rise on the common man. The Prime Minister said that we can't be content just, because our situation is better than the rest of the world. He said we still need to take more steps and see that the burden of inflation goes down on the citizens of the country. And he said that his government is going to take those steps and will continue to do so. So to discuss how we have moderated inflation, we're joined by Mr. Shubhomoy Bhattacharjee, consulting editor with the Business Standard and senior economic journalist, and Dr. Jitendra Kumar Dikshit, who teaches business management at GLA University, Mathura, and is a senior economic analyst. Mr. Bhattacharjee, core inflation has moderated by over 170 basis points since January of 2023. That's a steady decline. But how serious was the problem at the beginning of this calendar year?
That's an interesting question. The problem is that the inflation that is now creeping up, and inflation, as before we get into anything, we must always remember, inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. So inflation as it was creeping up was essentially because the supply of money in the economy had been rising, and it's been rising a bit excessively, because what's happened is the government, as you rightly said, during the pandemic was forced to loosen some purse strings. Also, the rate of interest wasn't high enough for people not to take positions on goods and services, goods especially. So given all that sort of a thing, the inflation was sort of inching up. And as normal conditions came up in the economy after the pandemic, demand rose, supply difficulties remained, not just because of India but also because of overseas situation. So the core inflation that has tended to spark up. Now core inflation typically means inflation other than food and fuel. So it's the manufacturing inflation, manufacturing sector inflation, yes. And that is the inflation that has been rising up. However, what's also exacerbates matters is that the food inflation, which is basically that of where we roughly look at mostly the fluctuations there are mostly due to vegetable prices.
Yes.
So those were also tending to move up. Now when those tended to move up because of lots of factors, then it was sort of building up one on the other, and that is what the RBI needed to do. And what the Governor Shaktikanta Das has rightly alluded to, that he has raised the rates. And remember, this rate hike has not happened suddenly, but it's happened over time, and it has happened over a period of time.
Okay.
So from the first month and when the RBI raised rates, that was about 17 months ago. So you can see that it takes time for the rates to gradually keep working through the economy and start making people become more conscious about what to buy, what to sell. So essentially what happens is that the inflationary tendencies for people to think that inflation will continue, and we therefore need to build in extra price buffer, that, and I'm talking largely about those who are the suppliers, that sort of is tending to ease, and that is what you're seeing the results now.
Dr. Dikshit, on the food side, what is the direct impact of government procurement of food grains, pulses, also making them available at fair price shops and completely free as well under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana? What is the impact of this?
Inflation is a kind of permanent nature of economy. And especially if we see in the month of July, when you have crossed the minimum benchmark of 6, that is set by the government, and we are reaching approx 7.44, then definitely we need to think. And exactly we need to think because from the last, see, from the last few years, even not the years, it is decades, people do have a tendency of shifting from the rural areas to urban area. Then suddenly you will find there is a change into the population into the metro cities. And that has suddenly created a demand. And when you have a demand, definitely, every time you cannot uh, satisfy the supply of everyone, because India is a agriculture driven economy where all parts of India is not behaving in the same way. Sometimes you are having a good crops in some places, in some regions you have a good crops. Then definitely we will face this kind of situation. Then when we talk about government, definitely when you are crossing this limit of 7.44, then definitely we have to take some measure. And if we talk about these measures, these are very fundamental kind of measures that every time the government will take. And obviously, this time the RBI governor has, again, they have stated that we are on the same right kind of track. That may have a long-term impact because immediate measures cannot have the immediate results. And if we talk about this government, this Pradhan Mantri Yojana, that is highly needed. Highly needed because exactly the problem of inflation coming with the food, exactly the supply cannot be increased. Right. So definitely, if you have some reserves, you have procured something in terms of wheat and rice, the government has exactly that has extended the kind of food program the government has, a scheme that government has initiated during the COVID, and definitely that will help. Right. And exactly that shows that these kind of programs need to be extended in near future also. Because
so you suggest that it continues, the programs continue so that they continue to.
But the major problem is that state government must also come into the role. Rather than blaming, they have to set their own rules that I will take care about this one and you just take care about this one. When parallelly state and central government will move and they will structure that scheme, definitely we will come in a position to face these kind of inflation, the variations in the economy that we are realizing, currently we are realizing.
Right. Mr. Bhattacharjee, retail inflation, retail price inflation consists of agriculture, allied sector, housing, textiles, pharmaceuticals. It's broad-based. So, I mean, from the supply and demand when that's after all how price is calculated. Is supply, meeting the demand across sectors?
Well, what is happening is that in a certain amount of inflation is good for the economy. Now, the point is about maintaining the tricky part of how much is necessary for the economy. Because if you don't have inflation, then what happens is producers run out of enthusiasm. They don't sort of factor in additional production. This is a basic tenet of any economy. Now, what happens is that India is a growing economy. It's one of the fastest growing economy in the world, and we are growth rates are actually holding up. Now, when that is holding up, you don't want prices to unnecessarily scupper that party. So, to make it simple, what it essentially means is that the RBI essentially decides that I am comfortable with a rate of around 4% inflation, but anything more than that, and the price band is about 6%. Is something that I am not going to be comfortable with. In fact, the Governor Shaktikant Das has actually made it even more clear. He says, I am actually not even comfortable with the band. My point is our inflation rate should be 4%. So, when 4% rate of inflation is the governor himself targeting, and that means, and he has the mandate of the Monetary Policy Committee also to target, that means that whenever they would see prices rising, and not only rising, but also tending to rise, tending to stay upward, so that it will keep on breaching the 4% rate, they will take measures to ensure that those prices don't stay up, which means that they will keep the rates of interest higher, so that unnecessarily people don't, and when I say people, I essentially mean producers. So, producers don't borrow more just for the purpose of trading. They borrow for manufacturing, that's fine. Agriculture, that's fine, which is why agriculture gets a subvention. For manufacturing, that's fine. But if there's a soft money supply, then what happens is then there's an incentive to borrow, buy off large quantities of goods and sort of hoard it, that in the expectation that prices will keep on rising. That is what they are nipping, and this is what is alluding to when he says that the calibrated fiscal and monetary policies that have been pursued since the pandemic has ensured that this has not really stayed on, which is why India, despite other countries, is able to say that the inflation rate is inching towards the median rate of 4%, and that's a remarkable management of inflation in a country as difficult as India, where there is lots of things that are around beyond the policy purview, but yet the RBI has been able to push it towards the inflation rate. It doesn't mean that the rates will not rise, but we can talk about that later.
Absolutely. Dr. Dikshit, the government, it has a price stabilization fund. That is to check the volatility in prices of agricultural and horticultural commodities. We've seen that these have, spikes and gluts, quite often shortages. How effective is this policy measure when you look at, creating a stabilization fund?
When you talk about this stabilization fund, definitely a scheme has been made with a very clear and pious purpose of maintaining the inflation and exactly to facilitate all kind of people who are at the bottom side of the economy. This fund is used by the government, and they were using it. But the problem is that it is depending on state, because if you have this kind of a state, if you have this kind of a scheme, this is also depending on how the state government is mobilizing this fund for the purpose of controlling this kind of inflation, the kind of food challenges that are arising at different part of India, and that is to be faced by the different category of the people. Because when we talk about inflation, is that exactly in a country like India, where the high level of diversity among the people, if you compare this impact of inflation in metro cities and in non-metro cities, especially into the semi-rural and the semi-urban areas, the impact is a little bit different. Then now the state has to come forward, and they have to strategize the things that how this kind of funds can be stabilized. Because at the end of the day, the state has to show this. When we are fighting with the inflation, it is a joint responsibility of the state as well as the central government.
Right. Indeed, you made an important point as far as, there are so many different kinds of markets. Prices do differ in each state. And of course, the seasonal markets especially, that's where the price stabilization fund goes in, where the short-term markets, especially very short-term markets, where vegetables and food supplies are concerned. But Mr. Bhattacharjee, how effective has the Monetary Policy Committee been in tackling inflation? You talked about, the fact that there was inflation is excess money chasing too few goods. That is the whole purpose of the Monetary Policy Committee, to try and reduce that supply of money to the level where it actually meets the number of goods in the market.
Yes, Mark, well, if one looks at it purely as an academic, purist point of view, the Monetary Policy Committee has found it difficult to bring inflation to exactly 4%, or at least very close to it. So, and that has happened for a long time. So, you can definitely say the Monetary Policy Committee is either overshooting or undershooting. Now, but on the positive side, what you notice is that the trend has always been going towards the golden mean of 4%, and that is a remarkable achievement by the Monetary Policy Committee. So, what has happened is that it's not been because of lots of factors, and remember, over the past 4 years, the world economy has gone through the sort of vibrations which has not happened for probably, I wouldn't say decades, I would even say centuries. Look at it this way, the pandemic, whose course nobody knew how to take, the resultant supply shock, the Russia-Ukraine war, and now to add it on, you've got the Middle East problem. On top of that, you've also got the climate change, which is also affecting food supply across the world by changing the crop patterns.
Right.
These are enormously significant changes in the world economy. Now, to be able to manage that and yet to keep inflation within control, just as an example, in USA, the Fed, which is the equivalent of the RBI, has mandated that it will want to bring it to 2%. It has not been able to get to that 2% for longer than the India's Monetary Policy Committee.
Right.
Now, that is a significant thing that the world's largest industrialized country, largest economy has not been able to reach there. In fact, they are now saying that the 2% rate will possibly not be reached, and so we have to recalibrate to a new rate.
Right.
The same problem afflicts Bank of England. The same problem afflicts has started affecting even countries like Australia.
So, if you were sitting on the committee, Mr. Bhattacharjee, would you be tightening the monetary policy further? The rate is 6.5%. Would you be raising it for more?
A slight rise might just be what is needed, but also remember that the world is now entering a period of slowdown. After many years, it is now clearly a slowdown that is happening, and that slowdown is something on which one would need to be very cautious, because as you look at it, in India only the domestic markers of growth are moving ahead.
Right.
So, you see that the industry use, if you look at the purchasing managers index both in goods and services, they are high, but the exports are not really doing all that well, and that is not something that is under India's control. It is simply that the global economy has perceptibly slowed down. So, given all that, it is going to be, raising, as I said earlier in this program, that raising rates, when you raise the rates do not, the inflation impact is not immediately
Transmission
there.
takes some time.
Transmission takes time, usually more than a year. So, one will have to see that whether the higher rate, say in 2024, end of 24, what will be the impact, or probably early 25.
Sure.
How, and so you can see the level of projection that you need to do to be able to take that call. It is a mighty difficult call.
Sure. Dr. Dikshit, the Prime Minister promised from the Red Fort on August 15th, he said that all government measures, are going to be put forward to try and reduce inflation. But we can see that all the measures of the government can be attributed directly to the Prime Minister's leadership. He has a personal, sort of direct approach in all these things. How effective has this been? Because, Prime Minister talking from Red Fort about inflation, we don't usually get those kind of things happening, right?
When Pradhan Mantri has promised from the Red Fort, the condition was different. 6% is he has set very right target, but the situation is always not remaining same. You have now all kind of the geopolitical conditions are changing.
Yes.
He has rightly said that recently we have we are seeing even the Russia-Ukraine war, and suddenly we have seen this Israel and Gaza issue. So in this condition, if we are setting this kind of target, the condition was something different, and if the geopolitical scenarios are changing very fast. In this condition, maintaining that kind of target that you have set is definitely it is a difficult task. Measures are taken, no problem. And the monetary policy, the monetary committee, they are definitely, we need to appreciate them, that every time they are intervening and they will try to control, try to manage everything. Yes. Definitely they need to be appreciated. But the conditions is not remaining same as when the Prime Minister was speaking from the Red Fort. But exactly the sufficient effort has been made, no issues. And the government has revised the import-export policies. Government has also have a close watch on the kind of interest rates, the repo rate, they have not changed even. And the kind of effort that we are putting, definitely they will have a long-term impact. Exactly the problem that we are facing today, and if you're taking measures today, then definitely that will have some long-term impact. And reaching to that bracket of 4, it is looking like little bit difficult.
Okay.
Other than this,
it's 4.87. It's coming down. Right.
Yeah.
But anyway,
when we were talking about India to be a trillion economy, then this kind of phenomena of this change in this inflation, the volatility into the change monthly or year-on-year basis, you see, we will see these kind of change are very obvious,
Okay,
and the
fair enough.
measures are to be taken, and we have to make a balance between all these kind of things. And government is taking measures. We have taken some financial measures. We are taking some monetary measures. We are revising our import-export policies. And
Yes.
you see, the food inflation, we are also managing with this. So government is putting a lot of effort, and definitely the efforts are well guided, and that will have a long-term impact.
Right.
But
Fair enough.
we need to understand this. The situation is not remaining same always.
No, that's
So
understood. I
we
mean,
have to consider
that's obviously the case. I mean, we can't plan
yes,
for
international
unforeseen
scenario, yes,
circumstances. But
yes, international scenario need to be considered.
true, true. Uh, Mr. Bhattacharjee, 2024, in fact, is expected to be a bad year. I mean, it's going to be a slowdown year for the global economy. So, will the price of imports increase because supply is reduced?
No, rather 2024, I mean, if we look at it ahead, I would say that the prices of commodities will soften.
Yes.
Let's look at it this way. Prices of lithium have come down sharply. Prices of other renewable energy items globally are coming down very sharply. Even a nascent sector like hydrogen, where companies are actually guiding for lower prices. So, renewable energy definitely is not rising. Next is oil and gas. Oil prices definitely have come off the highs. It's not really rising. Our petroleum minister, Mr. Hardeep Puri, was there in OPEC headquarters this week, in fact, and there was a good discussion. And clearly, the point is that India, being probably I mean, it's not only the fastest growing economy in the world; it now accounts for almost 25% of the world.
Right.
The growth rate of everything. So it's a massive growth. It's a massive puller of determiner of how prices would move. So I wouldn't expect prices of oil to really shoot up in this market. So you've got renewable energy down, you've got oil down. Given all that thing, then what happens to other commodities? Well, other commodities also, as the war in Russia and Ukraine sort of tapers off to more like a seasonal conflict, you see more production of wheat in the global market.
Yes.
So that definitely also comes down. So gradually, so essentially, if you look at it, coal prices have not really shot up.
Okay.
So essentially, as you see, that the prices of commodities will not be a very sharp, or will not be on a sharp
There's
upturn.
no shortages as such.
No, there won't be any shortage. I mean, that's what I'm saying. There won't be any shortages.
Right.
The price, and if that's not the case, then you definitely wouldn't expect inflation in those commodities to be high,
enough.
which means that our
Right.
import bill doesn't rise. And if it doesn't,
Sure.
then obviously you would expect the inflationary pressures.
We're running short of time, so we'll get 3 more questions in quickly. Dr. Dikshit, Shaktikanta Das talked about the inherent dynamism of the Indian economy. What is that dynamism that he's talking about, and is it helping in keeping inflation in check?
If we talk about the dynamism about which the RBI governor is talking about, Indian economy, when we talk about inflation, especially in context of Indian economy, if you see this whole basket of commodities that we have kept while we are calculating this inflation, definitely that is highly diversified. There are several kind of things which are even not a part of that kind of basket. Even they are having a huge impact, and they are contributing more on the inflation that is to be perceived by the people. There are 2 kind of things that we need to understand when we talk about inflation. Majorly, when we talk about these kind of discussions, we will talk about the data of inflation. That is to be more driven toward the industry. And when we talk about exactly the execution or the implementation perspective, that is exactly to be perceived by the people. The inflation is becoming a very big challenge for the people when they are realizing this. When we talk about realizing this, they are more concerned about the kind of thing, the kind of basket that they do have. The people are becoming more worried about the inflation. They will talk more about inflation suddenly when the price of the vegetables gone up, the price of commodities, price that we were using pulses, when they are gone up, sometimes the price of some textile items, some fuel items that just gone up, then it means the impact that is to be realized by the people, perceived by the people, it is little bit different. the way that the government reacts. The government is, the policy is totally depending on the kind of data that is to
Okay,
be
fine.
considered by
So
by the
so you're saying that anyway the policies are driving that dynamism. But Mr. Bhattacharjee, you know, a little bit of inflation, as you said, is good for growth. And you did mention that the RBI is looking at 4%. Can we assume that the balance is right or is moving towards that direction? Because, I mean, our growth is only 6.5%. I mean, the ideal would be much more, right?
No, I think in the current situation, we are actually doing rather well. Given the global economy's position, 6.5% rate of growth, and in fact, as the RBI governor said, and it came true, the growth rate actually for the first quarter or for the second quarter was rather better.
Yes.
So I would say that even if the growth for the rest of the year tapers down, we'll still remain one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And given India's size, a 6.5% growth rate is an enormously big thing. Remember, we are now closer to closing in on a 4 trillion economy. So essentially, these are very big numbers that we are talking about, and a growth rate of that size is actually very big. So yes, and given that RBI's capacity to ensure that the 4% rate is ensured does something very important, which is what it gives confidence to investors to invest in the Indian market, that the rates will stay low. So therefore, we know what is going to be the rate of return that we shall earn from the Indian market.
Yes.
That is where the trick comes along about why inflation is so important for a market to ensure.
A final word from you, Dr. Dikshit. You know, are you confident that inflation will continue to moderate? And if so, why?
The inflation will remain in the same kind of bracket between, it is 6 plus 6.5 plus 1 or 2 kind of, that will remain in the same kind of bracket. Because this kind of movement of supply and demand that will keep on moving across whole India, because suddenly this is a winter in some places, so the production of some kind of food grains, some kind of vegetables will little bit restricted. There are some places we will have a little bit more better farming. Most of the cases we will have a little bit more problem of rain. Most of the time we are depending on the agriculture, that is we are depending on the God's grace, that because on the rain. So there is a kind of several factors on which the whole this economy depends. But no doubt that there are some kind of measures on which the government have a full control. And when the government have a full control on that, the balance, the leverage can be maintained between both the factors who are controllable and the factors who are
I'm afraid I've run short of time, so we'll have to end it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Jitendra Kumar Dikshit and Shubham Bhattacharjee. Thank you for enlightening us on this important subject of how India has managed to moderate inflation. In conclusion, let's say this, India's economic management, it should be contrasted also with the advanced economies. We can see that those economies are still unable to bring inflation to within their targeted limits and are continuing with a series of monetary tightening measures. The economic survey at the beginning of the year and before the budget, it had predicted inflation risks becoming lower in the FY24, which will end in April of 24. That's compared to FY23. But, you know, there continue to be adverse disruptions, as was being talked about. We hope that the globalized economy will find a way around the turbulence as we approach the calendar year 2024. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.